Good evening. I'm Richard Kahn, President of the Academy. I'm delighted to welcome you here tonight, a night dedicated to the creative artists whose collaborative efforts 20 years ago brought forth one of the most entertaining and beloved motion pictures of our time. Oliver the Motion Picture began as Oliver the Musical, Lionel Bart's lively adaptation of the immortal Charles Dickens novel. It began its life on the London stage in June of 1960, and it was to play more than 2,600 performances there. In New York, it opened in 1963 and had an equally successful run of 800 performances, followed by a national company which toured the United States for more than 4 years, all of which led to Oliver earning a permanent spot in the history of the musical theater. When speculation began about the film translation of Oliver, there was much conjecture about who would play Fagin, who would play Nancy, who would play Bill Sikes, and names like Peter Sellers to play Fagin, and even Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton to play Nancy and Bill Sikes were speculated upon. But when production finally began on June 23, 1967, the cast was headed by Ron Moody. And this came as no surprise to anyone who had seen Mr. Moody in his own role of Fagin in the original London Company. On through the summer and fall of 1967, an army of creative cinema artists from Britain and the United States toiled under the direction of Sir Carol Reed. It was a magical production. In fact, it was a charmed one, and from some of our Oliver principals who you'll be hearing from later tonight, I think they will talk about how special this movie was. So special that even the English weather, inclement as it may be, turned sunny and the sun shone down on the production almost uninterruptedly throughout its shooting schedule, shining down on Dickensian London, which spilled out of 6 sound stages and onto the vast backlot of Shepperton Studios, all created by production designer John Box. I, along with a number of other people in this room tonight, were fortunate to work for Columbia Pictures at that time. One of my responsibilities was the production of the short documentary on the making of Oliver, a few scenes of which you saw earlier this evening. It was very special for us working on Oliver, and I think we all shared that magic that the filmmakers were engendering in London. What we weren't sure about is whether or not audiences would be equally responsive. But that question was answered in December of 1968. Actually, 20 years ago this week, the film opened at the Beverly Theater here in Beverly Hills. And soon thereafter, critics and audiences alike had embraced Oscar as a very special movie. The circle was complete, or I should say the O for Oliver was complete, in the spring of 1969, when the Academy awarded 6 Oscars to the motion picture, including 1 for Best Picture. Tonight, we are going to try and recreate that celebratory mood about the making of Oliver, which won so many Oscars. We're going to hear from a number of the creative alumni of Oliver, and then we're going to see this landmark film once again. Before we do that, however, I would like to express the appreciation of the Academy to Columbia Pictures for its support of this event. And also a very special thank you to Sir John Wolfe, the producer of Oliver, whose health prevents him from being here with us tonight, but whose invaluable assistance was with us every step of the way. And so now may I say, oh for Oliver, and on with the show. The first person I would like to call up on the stage is the man who was responsible for Columbia Pictures making Oliver. He was then the worldwide head of production, and once the arrangement was made with Columbia, he worked with John Wolfe on assembling the team that was to go on to make the picture. He's no stranger to the Academy. He's a former governor. He's a former producer of the Oscar telecast, and he is the recipient of one of the Academy's highest awards, the Jean Herschel Humanitarian Award. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. M.J. Frankovich, Mike Frankovich. Come right up here, Mike.
Right here.
Right here.
Okay.
Right there. The next person I would like to introduce was the executive in charge of Oliver's production. It was his job to make sure that everyone was in the right place, at the right time, in the right costume, on the right set, with the right equipment. He was a very able and important contributor to Oliver, as he was to so many other pictures which he either produced or executive produced in England, films like To Sir with Love, Force 10 from Navarone, The Odessa File, and Lord Jim. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. John Sloan. John, welcome. Right here. It's now my pleasure to welcome two of the stars of Oliver. He, of the moody and murderous and mean demeanor, burst on the screen in Oliver and was to go on to such starring roles in Women in Love, The Devils, The Three Musketeers, The Four Musketeers, and the just completed Return of the Musketeers. And she, the singer-actress who won the hearts of the world in her role of Nancy, who had previously captured the New York and London stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Oliver Reed and Miss Shani Wallis. No musical is complete without music. And no one knows more about movies and music than this next man. His credits are 10 miles long. He entered this industry of ours as a rehearsal pianist for Paramount Pictures in 1929. He went on to become the longtime musical director of MGM. He is the winner of 4 Academy Awards for his musical contributions to Easter Parade, American in Paris, West Side Story, and Oliver. Ladies and gentlemen, the distinguished composer, conductor, orchestrator, music director, and raconteur, the one and only Johnny Green. Joining Johnny on the stage is his daughter, Kathy Green. As a musical is no music without music, certainly it's not worthy of its genre unless it includes the dance. And Oliver was extremely fortunate to have as its choreographer and stager of musical sequences one of the premier musical contributors of our age. She had already won acclaim for her work on Broadway with such shows as Half a Sixpence and The Music Man, and later with Mame, both the Broadway and film versions. And for Oliver, she won a special Academy Award for her choreography, the last time such an award was bestowed upon anyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Onna White. The Dickensian London settings of Oliver proved to be the most complex and the largest ever constructed in the United Kingdom. They were the work of four-time Academy Award winner John Box, who picked up one of his 4 Academy Awards for Oliver. The others were for a couple of pictures like Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia and Nicholas and Alexandra. And working with him, art director Terrence Marsh, he only has 2 Academy Awards, for Dr. Zhivago and for Oliver. The dynamic duo who made Oliver come alive on the screen, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. John Box and Mr. Terrence Marsh. This is going to be your mic. Everybody here? Okay, we're all aboard. Well, good evening. It's nice to have you all back here again. You know, I said earlier this evening that it was no surprise that Ron Moody won the role of Fagin, but was really a surprise, especially after all of the conjecture as to who would play Nancy, as when it was announced that Shani Wallis was going to play Nancy. How did that all come about?
Well, I don't think I'd be here if it weren't for the gentleman sitting to your right, Mr. Frankovich. Because, you see, I was doing a show on Broadway, which unfortunately was a flop. It didn't last very long. But during that time, Ed Sullivan came in to see me, and he said, that's a beautiful love song that you sing. Would you come on my show and sing it? And the Broadway show was the story of how green was my valley, and I was playing Angharad. And so, of course, it was all in period costume. So there I was on the Ed Sullivan show, and my period costume, and I'm singing this song. And sure enough, next day I get a telegram from Hollywood from Mr. Mike Frankovich. And he said, in the telegram, it said, I want you to come to Hollywood because I think I have a role for you that's right for you. And that's exactly how it happened.
Well,
I never knew that.
Shani, I understand there was some concern, since you had appeared in so many American musicals in London, that you wouldn't be able to do a Cockney accent. Is that true?
That was I'm a Cockney. I mean, I really am. I'm afraid that's the way I grew up. But, you know, now, Mike, it was strange because he always believed that, you know, I could do it. It was the English people that didn't think I could do it. John Wolfe, I mean, so I had to go back and forth to London and do audio tapes and then test and everything. And here he was sitting, he said, oh, you could do it, you could do it. You know, it was amazing. It was a long road to hoe, and like you said, there were a lot of people that tried out for the role.
What happened when Mike told you you had the part?
Well, it was funny because he really was itching to tell me, you know, after the test, because everybody else had gone before me. I didn't think I had a chance in hell. But he called up and he said to me, Shani, I want to tell you, you got the role of Nancy. He says, but don't say anything to John Wolfe. Pretend it's a surprise, right? So then, about a half an hour later, I get a call from John Wolfe saying, Shani, you got the part of Nancy, but don't say anything to Mike Frankovich.
Oh, that's lovely.
And that's how it happened. You remember that? Do you? Oh, that's wonderful. Well, Mike, I love you dearly. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mike, you're sitting on your microphone here. You know, for over 20 years, Mike Frankovich has been thought of as the godfather of Oliver. And John Box, you were there at the beginning when John Wolfe was talking about making the film, and Mike was urging him to make it with Columbia, but the deal hadn't been made, and something had to happen. Somebody had to step in and make this deal come together. Do you remember that? Just talk into the mic.
Yeah, I've got a very vivid memory of going with Mike to New York to talk to Columbia. And you gave a great performance to Columbia, and you came out and said, how did I do? And we did very well, because we then made Oliver. Columbia put the money in, and off we went. Very early days, those were.
Mike really was the godfather. And Mike, once Columbia agreed to finance the film, you worked with John Wolfe on putting together the team and bringing in the North American elements. And with Joni Taps, you went to London with John Green and with Onna White, and you met with John Wolfe and the director who had been signed to do the film. That director wasn't Carol Reed. So my question to you is, you had a meeting with the director, with John and with Onna and everyone, but somehow or other, out of that meeting came the idea that maybe Carol Reed should direct this movie. And could you tell us a little bit about that fateful meeting that started out in one direction and ended up in another? The meeting, how did the meeting go?
Well, the meeting, I've got this, that's right. It was better then than it is tonight.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was very difficult for me because I didn't know all those people that time. But fortunately, I'd go home and do my homework, and my wife would be waiting for me all the time and telling me what to do.
Well, Mike, you had this meeting, and the director began to tell you how
You're taking it away from me now.
how he was going to make the picture. Tell us what happened.
Nothing happened.
Don't be tactful, Mike. Mike, don't be tactful. Tell him the truth.
John Green says, "Don't be tactful." What happened at that meeting?
Well, before you get to the meeting, I'm taking you to then John Reed's breakfast the next morning. And I went to see him, and he says, well, maybe I should do something there, because he didn't know anything about making pictures of that kind. And I said, well, you can do it, and you'll get it done. The next thing I knew, I had Onna White and John Green on my hands, and they had to go on with the picture from there.
Yeah, well, I understand at that meeting that because of the original director's concept, John and Onna started looking at their airplane tickets and decided they were going to go home. Is that right, Onna?
That's right.
No, it really isn't right.
But we didn't walk out of the meeting.
It really isn't right. No, you didn't walk out because I caught you at the airport.
John, did you start back to the United States before Mike saved the day?
No, what happened was that Anna and John Box and I became a filthy trio. We were the three musketeers, and we got ours,
Quite right.
or knew the reason why. And we became close friends and wonderful associates from that meeting onwards. And that original script that appalled us must have weighed 250 pounds. And we just said that, pages and pages have to come out of this. But I have to tell you something. It's a little technical, but I think you'll get a kick out of it. Oliver Reed had made Carol Reed had made a great picture called The Third Man, which I'm sure you all remember. And that was the picture with the zither in it, and that one theme. Now, I apologize already for being a little technical, so bear with me. It was a tapeworm, that theme. You may remember it. Bam ba-dam ba-dam ba-dam, bam ba-dam ba-dam ba-dam, bam ba-dam 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 ba-dam, ba-dam 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 ba-dam. Remember it? Well, Sir Carol had been his own editor on that picture. Not only picture-wise, but music-wise. Now, if you take a theme like that, which we call a tapeworm, and you cut it here, and you put it together the other way, how does it go? Bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. So Carol had been his own music editor on that picture. And therefore, thought he wrote the book about music. So in a motion picture script, the lyrics are included, and they are typed down the center of the page in a column. And so Carol knew, just as we all did, that this script was far too long. So he would come to here and go to a spot 4 pages later that made perfect sense when you talked it. And he would make that cut. And Onna and I would say to him, but Sir Carol, he wasn't Carol to us then, it won't work. I said, I'll go to the piano and show you. So I went to the piano and played this hunk of gibberish, to which Carol Reed gave the devastating reply, sounds perfectly wonderful to me.
Oh, that's a delightful story. Thank you, Johnny. You know, there's someone in the audience who, with John Green and Onna White, accompanied Mike Frankovich to that fateful meeting when apparently Sir Carol Reed came in and the other director went out. And that person was a longtime executive of Columbia Pictures, a producer of many fine musicals in his own right. And I'd like him to stand up and take a bow from the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Joni Taps.
Here.
Where's Joni? God bless you, Joni. Oliver Reed, how did you get to play Bill Sikes?
I don't know how I get any part. And this one was no exception. I had just been working very hard for the first time in my life. I'd been working back to back, and my agent phoned me up and said, somebody wants you for the movie. And I said, how much are they paying? And they told me. I said, well, it's my first big movie. And I said, I'm a working actor. I don't know how I got it.
I understand that when John Wolfe went to Sir Carol Reed with the idea that, you know, you had the right mean and murderous and moody demeanor. I keep seeing that in so much about what's written. I feel it right now. That John Wolfe asked Sir Carol if he knew you, I think. And, of course, I don't think Sir John was aware of your connection with the director. It was sort of a little bit of nepotism, in a way.
I think so. I thought, another thing is this crazy thing for an actor to say. I went to Carol and I said, Carol, I don't think I'm right for this because I think I'm too young. And, thank you, darling. And he said, I don't think Nancy would have done the things for Sikes if he'd been as old as Robert Newton was in the old Lean production. And I looked at Shani and I thought, well, I'm just bullshitting now, but what?
Well, anyway, you know, Oliver, you finally got the part, and it was an actor's dream. It was, as you said, your first starring role in a big $10 million production. But I'm wondering if it was a dream or a nightmare when you found out that your co-stars were going to be a bunch of kids and a dog. How did you contend with that?
Yeah, well, that was difficult. The dog, first of all, I had to bribe. I was, contrary to Nancy's belief, who didn't have to handle the dog too much, the makeup man, according to John, had to have his hand bitten every morning. Meantime, I went down there every morning for 2 weeks and fed the dog sausages. And so I know this is going to be contradicted. So at the time, what you will see in the movie, when Bullseye goes across the bridge, and he's pissing off to go and have a drink somewhere. Or the other words, pissing and going to have a drink. And so he's going across the bridge, and I say, Bullseye! And his name was Butch in the real life. And extraordinarily enough, he came back across the bridge on that particular take. Of course, when Shani had to do it afterwards. So then, leads on to another story, which I'll tell you since this is a family program, that...
We're all friends here.
Can I?
Yeah, please do.
Well, we, at the end of the movie, it was very sad, but two fellas fell off the gantry, which is the big thing up there, and one of them bounced on his head and survived and was back at work 3 days later. Do you remember that? Big, strong Negro. And there was a white man that fell off, and he got his head splattered across the road. But on the previous movie that went into there, they had, he got run over. So they said, no more end-of-film parties. So I smuggled a van load of champagne into the studio, and I had it delivered at my dressing room. And I put the buzz around the studios that it was towards the end of the film, and if they'd like a drink, come up to my dressing room. And including in that invitation was Bullseye, the dog. And so I put a large bowl of water on the floor and looked around, tipped the water out, filled it full of champagne. Bullseye came in, and he scoffed the lot, the bastard. And then, because everybody else, and the studios, all the lights were closing down, everybody was going sing-song merrily on high, they were all back to Christmas, they were all getting pissed in the main office, and everybody's going back, and all this lot were coming back. I thought, what about the property master, and what about Chuck and Charlie and the boys that were there? So Ron Moody, my stand-in Reggie Prince, and myself carried the last remaining crates of champagne out. And we carried one on one shoulder and one on the other. And we were going out of the door like this, and Ron Moody said, "Boy to left, quick, mortar." And Bullseye, who was pissed by this time, went, that's it, that's it.
Very good.
I don't remember that.
You didn't
John
finish
Box, John Box, Pauline Kael in her review of Oliver said that I think you broke us up here. Said that the sets for Oliver were a remarkable blend of realism and stylization, and I think she hit on something there because
Bullseye did.
the sets were incredibly real. They're incredibly detailed, yet they were also they were all a little bit larger than life, almost as if they were viewed from a child's perspective. And I'm wondering if maybe was that your aim, to kind of create a look of Dickens in London that was a little bit larger than life and something that an 8-year-old might see when he arrived in town.
Well, we started with two assets. You take Dickens. You've got a great storyteller. He's larger than life. You had Lionel Bart's music, which I thought was quite extraordinary, but I'm not musical, but I had to learn to fit images to music. And then you had Carol Reed, the director, and we talked, and now we knew nothing about musicals, and thanks to Mike, this lady on my left and that man over there came over and taught us about musicals, and I think in the end it wasn't a bad musical. It started a new form of musical, and I think you've got things like Les Miserables now, which I think have come out of Oliver. But as far as the sets are concerned, well, if you saw it on that film, take all the great thing about designing in movies, colour movies, is take all the colour out straight away. Otherwise you get a mishmash. And then bring in the colour when you want it. And then it has some dramatic intent. And you'll see in the film later the darkness of Fagin's kitchen and this, that, and the other, and suddenly the boy is released into a new life. Well, you'll see it for yourself. I'm talking a whole load of nonsense at the moment.
Well,
but I'm fascinated by Bullseye.
Yeah.
I know this old road quite well, by the
Can I
way.
tell you another story about the children?
I have one about
I'll tell you another
Bullseye,
story.
too.
Because, dear old Ron, and Ron is, God bless him, is not here because he's working hard. We're only here because we're unemployed. Or unemployable. And so, but Ron's working. But when Ron used to go, the first day I came down, I heard a whole load of screaming. And they were outside the commissary, debagging, taking Ron's trousers down. And I thought they were going to do the same thing for me. So in the film, it's amazing that with Carol's compassion and Ron Moody, which he had to do, and he let them do that because they had to love him a bit, I couldn't let them love me. So every time I went on the set, sorry, this eye syndrome, but actors are inclined to do this, aren't they, Shani? So I had to be very strict with them. And up until this time, even your children were frightened about that thing. Very difficult for an actor to follow a big musical number or a big dance number and then and then come in with straight, flat drama, because except for the judge, I'm about the only one that had to come in every time, and sometimes after a big musical number or a big dance number. I didn't have that at my disposal, but I had the rest of the talent.
Richard,
Yes, John.
I have to say something with no attempt whatever to be tactful. In the first place, I gathered from that very generous reception you gave me when I was wheeled up here that some of you know me from before. And I first must apologize for the absence of my carnation. What a terrible oversight. But it's been a strange day. I spent most of it at St. John's Hospital, but I'm here. But I want to explain, if I may, why this young lady is up here with me. And I said I wasn't going to be tactful. Mark Lester, who so beautifully played the part of little Oliver Twist, spoke in the most peculiar fashion, not just a British West Side accent, but a very special one. And unfortunately, he was both tone deaf and arrhythmic. So when it came time for Oliver to sing, we had to find other voices. So there was a dedication to finding a boy's voice. So we had shot the film. Carol had shot the film with all the way through with two other boys' voices. And when you put those voices with Mark Lester's face and speaking voice, it was a total misfit. This is going to explain the presence of this lady here.
I think we're getting a picture here.
She is a vocal chameleon. She hears a voice, she hears a language, the next thing that comes out of her mouth sounds like that. So sitting here is my daughter, Kathy, who, as you watch the film, it may shatter an illusion for you, but I'm going to tell it anyway. This lady is the singing voice of Oliver.
Thank you.
Kathy, you've been living with this secret for 20 years, I guess.
And I'll tell you another secret. I am the singing voice of Shani Wallis.
Oliver,
You'll
Oliver.
be lucky.
you always were the world's biggest ham, and you haven't changed.
Nor
But I
can I
love-
top it.
What'd you say,
I
Kath?
said, nor can I top that.
Well, we're indebted to you and to your contribution to the film, as unsung and as unheralded as it has been, and for this audience tonight.
It was a secret well worth keeping.
Well, you know, the Official Secrets Act, even in the motion picture industry, I guess has a statute of limitations, and tonight we've reached it. So now you all know.
But let me say something. The picture is so brilliantly directed that even though this 20-year illusion about Mark Lester singing being broken apart tonight is not going to spoil it for you. In fact, I think it'll enhance it, because you're in on a state secret. This lady is Mark Lester's singing voice.
Well,
And now you know, and we know.
well.
And Mike, you're not mad at me, are you?
No, Mike wouldn't be mad. Anna, when
What? What can I say after all that?
well,
My God, the dog, the
you know-
this and that. I'll tell you something about the dog. The dog that wouldn't go across the bridge? Well, the girls that owned the dog said, whatever you do, do not push the dog from the back. Okay? So now you, bullseye, nothing happens. He comes back to the camera. So Sir Carroll takes his foot and pushes the dog from the back, and the dog turned around and grabbed him on the ankle. And we had to pry the dogs. And the two girls who were hiding behind the barrels across the other end of the bridge were screaming, Spike! Spike!
May I add something to that? I remember the last shot, and you ladies and gentlemen in the audience will see, It's a Fine, Fine Life, right? And I finished it with all the gusto I had in me. And this bloody dog wouldn't follow you. And he's supposed to go down the alleyway and across
He wouldn't do it.
the
Yes,
and he wouldn't do it.
Darling heart, it was a close-up on you. They needed 14 shots on you. But the
Yes.
first shot they wanted on me and the dog, we did it together.
Yes, but...
You needed 14 shots anyway. I don't want to ask... Oh,
21!
Shut up!
21
Wait,
shots that
shut
took.
up. Shut up. John, tell the story about Carol always loved it. But Carol's foot up the dog's ass. But tell us the story about Carol and the pigeon. That's a lovely story.
Oh, that's sad.
This is in...
Oh, come on.
No, it's not sad at all.
Tell the story.
You'll see a great number. All of us arrived in London. I don't know how many of Onna's dancers, about 200 or 300 of them there. And I've said to Carol, just to get it going, a sort of flutter, we've got something like 20 or 30 pigeons. And as you say, action, I want to let these pigeons on. And Carol is a lovely man, Carol. He was a very gentle man. That's why he was so good with children, a great director of children, and a great understanding. He also, in his own house, had an aviary. And he loved birds. And he said, oh, John, give me one of them. And he took this bird and he stroked it very gently. And the bird started sort of purring like a pussycat, or birds do. And off went action, and all Onna's lot went up and down, jumping hither and thither, and all the rest of it. Our birds went off. Carol suddenly said, let his bird off. And he ignored all these dances. He watched this bird go up and up and up and up and away over Shepperton Studios. And he kept watching it, and it was a speck in the distance. And we had to say, Carol, they're dancing, you know. Now, I'm only saying that because that's a marvellous man, Carol Reed. And I've done other pictures with it. The gentleness of it, why he understood the story and why he got his bloody Oscar, I think. And I was so pleased that night when he went and got that Oscar. So pleased for him. He's a great director.
He's wonderful. He trained the owl. He had the owl.
Oh,
in
the
his
owls.
house.
Do you want to hear about an owl?
He trained the owl.
You'll see an owl, and he loved birds. We took the owl down to him. And Carol said, John, leave him with me tonight. He's part of the cast. I want to sort of get to know him. And I left the bird. Carol lived in a very beautiful house in King's Road in Chelsea. A beautiful house, sort of 1700 and something about it. Very elegant house, curtains and furniture and all the rest of it. And I left the owl with him. Next morning, a telephone call, John, please come down. And I went down and walked into this very beautiful room, and the curtains were tattered and torn to pieces. You must excuse me, but this owl had shat over all the furniture. And the owl was sitting up in the corner, glaring at Carol, and glaring at me. I don't know why at me, because I'm not a bird fancier, really.
No, you're a bit of shit, though.
And Carol just said one thing to me. He just said, it's awful, John, I think we've got to recast, you know. It's a clue to a great director.
John
They are human, you know.
John Sloan, listening to all these stories, and you trying to keep all of the things that were happening on Oliver, the music, the choral groups, the soloists, the dancing, and the dramatic, how did you manage to make 3 movies, which seems to be Oliver instead of just one, go forward and all go at the same time?
Well, I'm always asked this, Richard, but I'm always asked this, but the answer is, well, it worked. Now, if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you're in terrible trouble. But when you've got John Green, Onna, John Box, and people like that doing all their sorry, doing all their pieces. It's just a matter of integration, and I say it does work. Now, with us, we had our meetings every evening, as John knows, and so on. And I don't know if you remember the time, John, we were coming into shooting our first musical number, and we had 12 schedules all hanging down from the ceiling to the floor, and they were all integrated, and we were all ready to go the next morning. And you looked round to me, I remember, and you said, but you haven't allowed a free day before we start shooting it. I said, no, Johnny, we don't do that here. So as you turned round, you came face to face with John Wolfe, and you said, well, you must be bloody geniuses. And John Wolfe looked at you and said, but we are, John, we are. Everybody.
True. And thank you again.
I just have one thing to say about that set. Who'll-By was the first number we shot. Now, we're in the office, so we see, now, how many people are we allowed to have in this set? They said, well, 72. And I said, 72 people in that huge Bloomsbury Square? We can't, John and I said. So we ended up with 276.
Well, they have to be able to move.
I just want to get back and talk just before you finish up, sir. That another story that I remember, I fell in love with one of Onna's dancers, and I had a daughter by her, and I'm very, very proud of her daughter.
Jacqueline.
And Jacqueline, that's right. And and we have a...
He said, please may I meet her, please may I meet her, please.
Yeah, and Onna also had a collie dog called Oliver, or her assistant did.
Yeah, the little Australian boy had
That's right, had a collie dog called Oliver. And so I was told that if I went in while they were rehearsing, I would be able to ogle this girl and maybe hand her my telephone number. And so I bucked up the courage, being very shy, and I walked into where I heard Onna saying, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, and I came into the room very quietly into this big, huge studio. And I heard Onna shout out, Oliver, stop that! I've told you not to do that! And the dog was pissing against the side of the stage, and I thought she was talking to me. So I ran out, and that's why the governor calls Oliver Oscar.
Can I say something? I don't remember. And I'd like Kathy to refresh me and tell all of us, how did you come to supplant the little boys who had sung Oliver's voice? How did you get the job?
Certainly not through nepotism. He's not strong on nepotism. It was an accident. I happened to be working at the studio while they were working. They were doing redubbing on the boy's voice, and I was working with Richard Harris and David Hemmings, and I went by to say hello. And that's what happened. They were not pleased with the boys' voices that they were hearing. The boy that I was listening to couldn't sing in key, and he didn't get the tone right. And I did it to myself. I didn't realize how loud it was. And he turned around and said, who was that? And I thought he was really angry, so I didn't say it was me. And then when I realized he needed to know who did it, I said, it was me. And then when he asked me if I could lip sync, I was raised to say yes to everything, so I did. And that's how it happened.
Anyway, I just have
a lovely story.
one thing I must say. One thing I must, before we get the hell off here, because I think people are getting... I have to say one thing for Joni Taps. Joni Taps is responsible for me getting that movie. He really rooted for me. As a matter of fact, he got me Bye Bye Birdie also.
Here, here.
And he was the one that hung
Second
on
that.
and said, you got to get on her, you got to get on her, you got to get on her. And so I did it.
Well,
Thank God we
you,
got on.
that's right. You know, Terry Marsh, the art director, you were responsible for executing John Box's vision. And if you read the stories about the production, you continually see a reference to Box's army, the 350 craftsmen who were responsible for building those sets. And if indeed it was Box's army, then you were the commanding general. And looking as
Bravo, bravo.
as we'll see tonight, the sets, those footbridges and those great staircases that tower 3 and 4 stories high, and the overpasses with the trains running on them. It must have been a monumental effort and something that had never really been approached at that large a size before. Tell us about it.
Well, it was a monumental effort, and also it was a fascinating task because not having done a musical before, we didn't know anything about in-set rehearsals and marked out sets. I mean, normally we built the set and we shot the set and it was fine, but then Onna and John arrived on the scene and nothing was quite as it ever had been before.
Well, thank God you did that.
Yeah.
You did, because otherwise
But we
it
were
would've been-
also dragged in. I mean, Onna and John wanted a version of the set as it would finally be to rehearse in, and then we would have to go back and complete it. But out of that came ideas. Do you remember when we were thinking, what can we have people doing, mending roads, going up and down on hoists on buildings, fishwives, you know, all that sort of stuff.
Or Welsh
Nothing
nanny.
about the dog. No.
What about the Welsh nanny?
The Welsh nanny?
John, the story you told me about the Welsh nanny.
Yaki da, I'm remaining very silent. No,
It's going to get him
see,
into trouble.
Are
Terry
you
knows
being
this.
naughty? Are you being naughty?
He's always been
He's been
naughty.
naughty.
He's been naughty all night.
He always has been and always will be.
I will get even with you.
I don't know about you, but maybe we better get...
We better
closer
show the
so we
film.
get
No,
the-
we
Show the
what,
film.
what the audience doesn't know is that in front of us, these 3 cube tables, is a big clock. And I think the clock is so big it's intimidating our guests, but no, we're right on schedule. We have exactly 4 minutes more to go. And during those 4 minutes, I would just like to ask Onna, who not only staged the musical number in the workhouse, which begins the film, Food, Glorious Food, but I guess not only were you the musical stager, but you were also somewhat of a drill instructor, police
And a mother
lieutenant,
hen.
and a mother to those 70 young men who...
I had sentinels at every single door on that set because those kids were street urchins. They would be having terrible fights out there on that little square thing out there. So I had somebody stationed at each thing to stop. And then when it came their cue to come out, that fellow would say, okay, you're out. Left, right. And that's how we did that. Otherwise, I mean, those kids, I didn't know for several days that there were a pair of twins in there. I was looking over and I saw this poor boy leaning against the wall, sound asleep. I said, seems to me I just saw him over there. And there he was. So I said, oh my God, they're twins. And I said to the young kid who was sleeping, I said, well, don't you go to bed? I mean, did you not get any sleep last night? He said, well, my dad came home drunk and he was beating up our mom, so we had to stay up all night to protect her. I mean, that's the kind of things that was
Actually-
happening at the...
Actually, these kids were very much 20th century recreations
But they were
of
one. They
Oliver
were
and
fine.
his, and
They
his
were very good.
workhouse friends. As we wrap up this little
Richard?
discussion, we talk about the Hollywood to London link-up that Onna and John Green comprised, and the man who stood astride all of that, as we know and as we've heard tonight, and was such a dominant figure throughout the 1960s during the period of time that London was truly Hollywood on the Thames, was this gentleman on my right, first as head of UK production and then worldwide production. And in a brief period of only 11 years, Mike, I think it's kind of incredible that under your auspices, 4 Best Pictures came rolling out: Bridge on the River Kwai, Lawrence of Arabia, Man for All Seasons, and Oliver. A remarkable achievement.
And
We all
Richard-
salute you.
Richard,
Johnny?
if I may, I'd like to top this all off by making an observation as the senior citizen here, God help me, that it's always fair weather when honest folk get together.
I can't think of a better way to conclude our discussion. I thank each of our guests. John Box has another animal story, I think.
No animal story. Just
I have one, too. Just
no,
one
very,
more.
very simply. I was with Ron Moody last week,
Oh, my God.
and he should have been here, not me. but he sends his love to all of you.
And one more thing for dear departed Sir Carol. Pempy wrote me a letter and said, Onna, don't be sad. He died in his sleep with a smile, reading a trashy Hollywood novel. It's just
Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all for coming tonight, especially Oliver Reed and John Box, who came here especially from London to be with us. And we now go on to look at Oliver the film. I might note that we're going to be seeing a Technicolor imbibition print. It's a dye transfer print, probably the last one in existence. What happened to the video? Well, that's not our table, I'm afraid. But this is the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Well,
who am I going to sue?
anyway, I'd like to conclude by saying that we enjoyed our evening. We salute and laud the accomplishments of everyone who has come together around to celebrate Oliver 20 years later. And now we all suggest that you sit back and enjoy the film. Thank you very much.